A few years ago, I was a recent college graduate, scraping by with a dead-end job that barely covered my rent and student loan payments. I'd always dreamed of becoming an entrepreneur, but the reality of my situation, working long hours in a cubicle, barely getting by, left me feeling stuck and hopeless. I wasn't living the life I'd imagined, and the worst part was, I felt like there was no way out. I knew I had potential, but I had no idea where to start or how to get my ideas off the ground. One morning, I woke up to another email about a new job opening at some company that had zero interest to me. The thought of spending another year, or even worse, another decade, doing something I didn't care about made my stomach turn. That day, I decided I wasn't going to be a passive observer in my own life anymore. I wanted to take control, and the only way to do that was to start my own business. But, like most people who have big dreams and no experience, I was overwhelmed with where to begin. I started researching everything I could about entrepreneurship. I watched YouTube videos, read blogs, and downloaded countless ebooks. The more I learned, the more I realized how much I didn't know. There were so many obstacles, so many potential risks, and the thought of failing made me question if I was doing the right thing. Still, I kept pushing forward. I didn't have a huge sum of money to invest in a business, but I knew I had to start small. I decided to start with something I was passionate about, something I could do on the side while working my full-time job. I had always been interested in fitness and health, so I thought about starting a fitness blog. At least I could write about what I loved and maybe make a bit of money along the way. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I spent the next few months building the blog, posting about fitness routines, healthy eating, and motivational tips. I posted regularly, but nothing was happening. I wasn't getting the traction I had hoped for. I was frustrated. I thought, if I can't even get traffic to a blog, how am I ever going to start a real business? Then one day, while I was scrolling through social media, I saw an ad for an online course about growing your Instagram following. It was a cheap course, so I figured, why not? I needed something to boost my visibility. I bought it, and after completing it, I started to apply the tips I had learned. Slowly but surely, my Instagram following grew, and I began engaging with my audience more. The small victories, like receiving positive comments and gaining followers, were encouraging. That's when things started to change. I began monetizing my Instagram by partnering with small fitness brands. I wasn't making much money, but the fact that I was making money from my passion felt like a huge win. The more I worked on it, the more I realized that the blog was limiting me. I wanted to reach more people, and Instagram gave me the platform to do that. So, I shifted my focus entirely to Instagram, building content, engaging with my followers, and promoting products. But just as things started to take off, I hit another roadblock. One of my sponsored posts was flagged for violating Instagram's advertising guidelines. My account was temporarily suspended, and all the progress I had made seemed to vanish overnight. I panicked. I had spent months building this account, and now it could all be taken away because of one mistake. I appealed the suspension, but the process took weeks. During that time, I thought about quitting. The idea of starting over felt overwhelming. But after some reflection, I decided not to give up. I realized that my business wasn't just about one platform. It was about the audience I had built and the value I could provide. I also learned the importance of diversifying my revenue streams. I could rely on Instagram, but I needed to build an email list, create my own digital products, and explore other ways of generating income. When my account was finally reinstated, I was more determined than ever. I didn't just want to be an influencer. I wanted to build a brand. So, I started creating digital products like workout plans, meal guides, and fitness courses. I began selling these products directly through my website. This was a game changer. My income started to grow more consistently, and I realized that I was finally on the path to becoming a full-time entrepreneur. But there were still challenges. I faced burnout. Managing content, interacting with followers, creating products, and running a business on my own was exhausting. I didn't have the luxury of a team. At times, I felt like I was drowning. But instead of giving up, I learned to delegate. I hired a part-time assistant to help with customer service and social media management. I also invested in software that automated some of my processes, which helped me streamline my workflow. As my business continued to grow, I realized something important. It wasn't just about making money. It was about creating something that would have a lasting impact. My followers weren't just numbers to me. They were real people who were on their own fitness journeys. I began receiving messages from people who said that my content had changed their lives. That was when I realized that my purpose was bigger than just making money. It was about helping people live healthier, happier lives. Fast forward to today, and my business has grown beyond what I ever imagined. I have a team that helps me run the day-to-day operations, and my income is more than I ever dreamed possible. I've expanded my product line, started hosting online coaching sessions, and launched a podcast to share more in-depth fitness and business advice. Looking back, I realized that the key to my success wasn't just working hard or having a great idea. It was about persevering when things got tough. It was about learning from my failures and pivoting when necessary. It was about not letting fear hold me back from taking risks. If I had given up after my Instagram account got suspended, or if I had thrown in the towel when things weren't going as planned, I wouldn't be where I am today. Now, as I sit in my office, managing a successful business, I often think about that young graduate who felt lost and overwhelmed. If I could go back and tell him one thing, it would be this: don't be afraid to fail. Failures aren't the end, they're just part of the process. And most importantly, trust yourself. You're capable of more than you know. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I'll start by saying I wasn't born into wealth. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth, nor was I one of those kids who knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life from the age of 5. Hell, I barely knew what I wanted for dinner on most days. My name's Alex, and I'm an entrepreneur now, but that wasn't always the case. I started as a kid with big dreams but very little direction. In high school, I was the kid who hustled for side jobs. I mowed lawns, walked dogs, worked at a local grocery store on weekends. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a sense of independence that I liked. My parents, both hardworking and practical people, were always encouraging me to think about stability. Get a solid degree, find a job with benefits, and live a predictable life. But for me, that didn't feel like living. It felt like existing. In college, I majored in business because it seemed like the safest route. But my real passion was technology. Computers fascinated me. I loved coding, building websites, and just figuring out how things worked. One day, I had an idea. It wasn't a revolutionary idea or something that would change the world, but it was an idea that I felt could solve a problem that a lot of people had. I didn't know it yet, but it was the spark that would eventually become my first business. Back then, my idea seemed small. The concept was simple: create a platform that would connect freelancers with businesses in need of short-term projects. There were a few big players in the freelance world, but they were either too expensive, too complicated, or too slow. My vision was to make it easier, faster, and more affordable for businesses to find skilled workers for one-off jobs. It seemed obvious in hindsight, but at the time, I had no idea if it would work. I remember sitting in my dorm room at 2 a.m., coding the first version of the site. It was ugly. The user interface was clunky, the design was basic, and the features were limited. But I had something that the big guys didn't have: passion and time. I poured everything I had into this idea, spending every free moment working on it. I didn't sleep much. I barely ate. I was just obsessed with making it work. After months of late nights and countless cups of coffee, the platform was ready for launch. I didn't have any investors. Hell, I didn't even have a marketing budget. But I didn't care. I had faith in the idea. So, I launched it quietly to a small group of users, friends, family, and a few people I reached out to online who might be interested. At first, nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. I didn't have any users. My website had crickets. I was discouraged, but I refused to give up. I started reaching out to businesses directly, offering them a free trial to get them on board. Slowly but surely, the site started to pick up traction. I remember the first time I got an email from someone I didn't know telling me they had found a freelancer through my platform. It wasn't much, but to me, it was everything. I had my first customer. Things didn't magically take off from there. I kept grinding, tweaking the platform, getting feedback, and refining it. I kept looking for ways to make it easier for businesses to find talent. Then, a turning point came when I got my first big client, a well-known marketing agency. They had hundreds of freelance gigs each month and were looking for a more streamlined way to find workers. I was nervous as hell when they signed up, but I worked with them closely, learning the ins and outs of how they managed their freelance hiring process. By the end of the contract, they were raving about the platform. and that was the boost I needed. From there, things started to snowball. I began to expand the platform to include more features, payment processing, time tracking, performance reviews, and more. I hired a small team to help with development and customer support, and we kept adding value to the platform. Every new feature felt like a step closer to the dream I had envisioned all those months ago. But just when I thought things were going well, disaster struck. A massive competitor in the freelance space, one that had millions of dollars in funding and thousands of users, launched a new feature that mimicked what I was doing but on a much larger scale. It was a huge blow. For a brief moment, I considered shutting the whole thing down. I wasn't sure if I could compete with a company that had the resources to outspend and outlast me. But then something strange happened. Users of my platform, the small businesses and freelancers who had been with me from the start, began speaking up. They didn't want to use the bigger platforms. They liked the personal touch I brought to the business. They felt like they mattered. So, I doubled down on my core values: customer service, simplicity, and a focus on creating the best experience possible. It wasn't easy. There were long nights of stress and self-doubt. There were times when I wasn't sure if we could keep going. But we did. The business grew, slowly but steadily. The platform became more refined, more trusted, and more widely used. I was able to raise a bit of capital and expand the team, bringing in people who shared my vision and passion. Today, the platform I started from that small idea in my dorm room is a multi-million-dollar business. We're not the biggest in the space, but we're one of the most trusted. We've helped thousands of freelancers find meaningful work and businesses find the talent they need. The best part is that we've created a community of users who genuinely care about the platform and the people behind it. Looking back, I realized that success wasn't just about the idea or the product, it was about perseverance. It was about the ability to keep going even when everything seemed like it was falling apart. It was about constantly improving and never settling for good enough. I didn't have any grand visions of changing the world, but I did have a desire to make people's lives a little bit easier. And to me, that's what entrepreneurship is all about: solving problems, taking risks, and believing in yourself even when no one else does. So, if you're reading this and you're thinking about starting your own thing, just know that it's going to be tough. There will be times when you doubt yourself, when you feel like quitting, when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. But keep going, keep improving, and most importantly, keep believing in what you're doing. You never know, your idea might be the one that changes everything. I was 26 years old, broke, and living in my mom's basement when I decided I was done being just another cog in the corporate machine. I had a comfortable job at a marketing agency, where I was paid enough to get by but never really challenged. I daydreamed about starting my own business for years, but the fear of failure and the security of my paycheck kept me chained to my desk. One night, after a particularly frustrating day at work, I decided I was going to quit. I didn't know how, but I was certain that the time had come. I had been researching different ideas for months, but nothing felt quite right. That's when I stumbled on an article about dropshipping and everything clicked. The idea that I could run a business without holding any inventory, without renting a physical store, and without a huge initial investment felt like a miracle. I dove deep into learning everything I could about e-commerce, branding, and how to set up a successful dropshipping store. There were 1,000 guides, courses, and videos to sift through, and I soaked up as much information as possible. My mind was racing with possibilities. This could be the start of something huge. But here's the thing. I had no money. Zero. Nada. My savings account had been wiped out after some bad investments and overspending. I didn't even have enough for a website domain, much less paid ads or fancy branding. The only thing I had was a laptop, a relentless drive to change my life, and a support system that, despite their skepticism, believed I could pull it off. I spent every waking hour working on my store. I learned about Shopify, found a niche I was passionate about: pet products, because who doesn't love animals, and began creating a store. The first few weeks were rough. I barely had a clue what I was doing, and everything seemed to be going wrong. I struggled to find suppliers, my website looked amateur, and my first set of Facebook ads didn't get any clicks. But I kept pushing. After a couple of months, I was about to give up. The sales were minimal, and I was starting to think that maybe I just didn't have what it takes. But one morning, I woke up to a notification that I had made a sale overnight. Just one, but it was the first real affirmation that my idea had potential. It was the spark I needed to keep going. I spent the next few weeks tweaking my ads, optimizing the website, and reaching out to suppliers to improve the product offerings. Slowly but surely, the sales started to trickle in. I was finally making some money, small amounts at first, but I could see the growth. I took every penny I earned and reinvested it back into the business, whether it was for more ads, better tools, or improving my website's design. But then came the hardest part. I started to notice that some of my products were being returned. The quality wasn't as great as I thought it was, and some customers were complaining about slow shipping times. I was crushed. I had spent so much time trying to get to this point, and now it felt like I was losing my grip. The customer service emails piled up, and I felt like I was drowning. I knew I had to figure out a way to fix this, and quickly. I spent hours researching how to improve the customer experience. I realized that I had to be transparent with my customers about shipping times and quality. I updated my product descriptions, set clear expectations about delivery dates, and started offering better customer support. I also switched to suppliers who were more reliable and had better products. It wasn't an instant fix. In fact, it took months to get everything running smoothly. But slowly, the returns decreased and positive reviews began rolling in. I started receiving repeat customers, which was a huge milestone. My sales continued to climb, and before long, I was making more money than I had at my 9-to-5 job. At that point, I was faced with another decision. My business was doing well enough that I could quit my full-time job, but I was terrified. I'd never relied on a business of my own before. The idea of losing the steady paycheck and benefits was daunting, but I took the leap. I handed in my resignation and committed full-time to my e-commerce store. The first few months were challenging as expected. There were new problems to solve: hiring people, streamlining operations, and handling the complexities of scaling a business. But as the months went by, I started to build a team, streamline my processes, and develop a better understanding of what my customers wanted. I began expanding my product range, improving my branding, and even developing an influencer marketing strategy. By the end of the first year, I had managed to turn my small dropshipping store into a six-figure business. I was able to quit my second job, hire a small team, and even start taking weekends off. It wasn't easy, but I had finally created something that I could be proud of. The turning point came when I started scaling. I focused heavily on Facebook and Instagram ads and started collaborating with influencers who had large followings in the pet niche. The sales surged, and my brand began to gain recognition. As I reinvested profits into growing the business, I also launched an email marketing strategy that allowed me to stay connected with my customers and create more personalized shopping experiences. But success never comes without challenges. I faced competition from other dropshipping businesses, and the market kept evolving. New platforms like TikTok gained traction, and I had to adapt quickly. I learned to pivot my strategies, stay on top of trends, and continuously improve my products. Fast forward to now. I've expanded into other markets, including home goods and outdoor gear. I no longer work from my mom's basement. I now have an office, a warehouse, and a team of 15 employees who help me run the business. My revenue is now in the 7 figures, and I've learned so much along the way: how to manage a team, how to scale a business, and how to build a brand that resonates with customers. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. I was once just another broke guy with a dream, but now I'm living a life I never thought possible. And while it wasn't an easy journey, full of long nights, failure, and uncertainty, I wouldn't change a thing. Every mistake, every setback, and every win shaped who I am today. To anyone reading this who's thinking about starting their own business, my advice is simple: don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait for all the pieces to fall into place. Just start. You'll figure it out along the way, and it won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Take the leap, because there's a good chance that the life you're dreaming of is just on the other side of that first decision. Let me tell you the story of how I went from living paycheck to paycheck, working 9 to 5, to building a business that has become my passion and my livelihood. It all started about 6 years ago. I was stuck in a job I didn't care about. I worked in corporate finance for a medium-sized company. I had a decent salary, good benefits, and a fairly stable routine. But I was miserable. My days felt like they were blending into each other, and the thought of spending another 30 years doing the same thing filled me with dread. I had dreams, big dreams, of doing something that actually excited me, but I had no idea what that something was. One day, during my lunch break, I came across an article online about a guy who had quit his corporate job to start a small online store. He was selling something as simple as homemade candles and was making enough money to live comfortably while working from home. At first, I thought, that's too good to be true. But as I read more, I felt something inside me shift. If this guy could do it, why couldn't I? The problem was, I had zero experience in entrepreneurship. I had always been a safe person. I followed the rules. I went to school, got a degree, landed a stable job, and lived for the weekend. But the idea of creating something from scratch, of building my own future, it was so compelling. I spent the next few months obsessively reading everything I could about online businesses, e-commerce, and marketing. I had no plan, no idea what I was doing, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to get out of the cycle of mediocrity that I'd been in. I decided to dip my toes in the water with a side project. I didn't want to quit my job right away. That would have been irresponsible, considering I had bills to pay and responsibilities. I came up with an idea. I would create a website that sold eco-friendly products. Sustainability was something I was passionate about, and I had seen a growing trend in people's interest in green alternatives to everyday products. I thought, why not create a store that promotes eco-friendly living? Starting wasn't easy. I had no technical skills. I didn't know how to build a website, set up an online store, or market products. But I was determined. I spent weeks learning how to use platforms like Shopify and WordPress. I taught myself how to create product listings, take decent photos, and write sales copy. I started sourcing products from suppliers who shared my values. I had to hustle hard, working late into the night after my day job, just to get everything in place. Once the site was up and running, I hit my first big hurdle: marketing. I quickly learned that having a website wasn't enough. People needed to know it existed. I threw myself into learning digital marketing, SEO, Facebook ads, Instagram campaigns. At first, my results were dismal. I'd spent money on ads that didn't lead to sales, and I felt like I was throwing money down the drain. But I didn't give up. I kept tweaking my strategy, trying new things, testing what worked. Slowly, I started to see some sales trickle in. A breakthrough came when I partnered with a well-known sustainability influencer to promote my products. She shared my passion for eco-friendly living, and her endorsement brought a wave of traffic to my site. I was finally making sales that weren't just from friends and family. I started to see the potential of what I was building. Still, I was juggling this side business with my full-time job. It was exhausting. I would wake up at 6 a.m. to check orders and reply to emails before heading into work. On weekends, I'd dedicate entire days to working on the business, updating the website, researching new products, managing customer service. It was a grind, but I was determined. And little by little, my side business started to grow. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to get me excited. Then, after about a year, I hit a wall. I had reached the limit of what I could do while holding on to my 9-to-5. My business was starting to demand more attention, and it was clear that I couldn't keep up with both. So, I made the decision. I was going to quit my corporate job and go full-time with my business. The decision wasn't easy. There were a lot of sleepless nights filled with doubt. What if the business didn't grow as I hoped? What if I failed? What would people think? But deep down, I knew that I would never forgive myself if I didn't give it my best shot. So, I took the leap. The first few months of full-time entrepreneurship were a roller coaster. There were days when I felt on top of the world, and others when I doubted everything. I learned quickly that being an entrepreneur wasn't just about making money. It was about constantly adapting and learning. I had to wear every hat: marketing, customer service, logistics, finances, everything. But each day I saw more and more progress. Sales grew steadily, and I started building a small team to help me manage the workload. I also realized that the key to success wasn't just offering great products. It was about building a brand and a community. I made sure to engage with my customers regularly, asking for feedback and making improvements based on their suggestions. I ran promotions, hosted giveaways, and partnered with other businesses that shared my values. Slowly but surely, I built a loyal customer base. About 3 years after quitting my job, my business had reached a point where it was generating consistent revenue, and I was able to take a salary that matched what I had been making at my corporate job. But more importantly, I felt fulfilled. I was doing something I loved, and I was helping others make more sustainable choices. Today, my business has grown into a full-fledged e-commerce platform that sells a wide range of eco-friendly products, from household goods to beauty products to fashion. I've expanded to multiple markets, and my team has grown to 15 people. I've learned so much along the way, and I'm still learning every day. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. It feels surreal to think that just 6 years ago, I was stuck in a job I hated, unsure of what I wanted out of life. Now, I get to wake up every day excited to work on something I love. It wasn't easy, and there were many times I wanted to give up, but the journey has been worth it. If you're sitting on the fence, thinking about making a change, I encourage you to take that first step. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. I started my first business when I was 23, straight out of college. It wasn't glamorous or groundbreaking by any means. In fact, it was the definition of a side hustle that I started on a whim. At the time, I had just finished my degree in marketing and was working a 9-to-5 job at a local marketing agency. The pay wasn't great, but it was a steady paycheck, and I thought that's what I should be doing. But deep down, I felt restless. I couldn't shake the idea that there was something more I could do, something I could build from the ground up. One evening, after another draining day at the office, I sat down with a notebook and started scribbling down ideas. I was pretty good at making designs and had a flair for understanding what was trending on social media. Around that time, personalized products, custom shirts, mugs, and prints were becoming a thing. I thought to myself, I could make something like that, just a little different. Maybe focus on creating unique, niche designs for specific subcultures or interests that no one was really targeting. So, I went to work. The first few weeks were slow. I didn't have a lot of money to invest in inventory, so I decided to go the dropshipping route. I spent hours researching suppliers, finding the best ones that would offer good quality products at a reasonable price. My first product? Custom t-shirts. I built a simple website, set up a Shopify store, and spent hours creating designs based on some random niche interests, things like obscure comic book references, vintage gaming, and memes that only a small community would understand. I didn't expect to make a fortune, but I thought it would be a fun project. I didn't tell anyone about it at first, especially not my friends or family. It felt a bit embarrassing, honestly. The idea of launching something so small, so insignificant, seemed laughable. But I spent my nights building my brand, refining my designs, and trying to figure out how to market the products. My biggest challenge was figuring out how to get noticed. I didn't have a marketing budget, and I certainly didn't have the clout to reach out to influencers. So, I did what any marketer would do. I started advertising on Facebook. The first few campaigns were disastrous. I created these ads thinking they would be hilarious and would instantly go viral. They didn't. They flopped. My targeting was off, and I had no clue what I was doing when it came to creating effective ads. I probably spent a few $100s before I realized that throwing money at ads without a solid strategy was a complete waste. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. I went back to the drawing board. I reworked my campaigns, adjusting the targeting and trying different ad formats. I began focusing on understanding my audience better, figuring out what people actually wanted rather than just assuming what they would buy. Slowly, I started seeing some traction. A few sales trickled in, then a few more. Then, something unexpected happened. A meme page with a large following shared one of my designs, and boom, sales exploded. The orders came in fast and furious, and I couldn't keep up. I had to upgrade my website. I had to hire someone to help with customer service. The entire business was running on fumes, but I kept pushing. I spent all of my free time fulfilling orders and building relationships with my customers. Slowly, I started making more money than I was earning at my day job, but I was still hesitant to quit. I didn't want to let go of the security my 9-to-5 provided. I still feared failure. But one day, I realized something. I had grown enough that I was doing 2 full-time jobs, my 9-to-5 and my side business. The stress of balancing both was overwhelming. I wasn't sleeping enough, I was missing family events, and I was constantly burnt out. That's when I made the decision. I would quit my job and go full-time with the business. It was a terrifying decision. I didn't have a concrete plan for scaling the business, and the uncertainty was paralyzing. But after doing a thorough analysis of my finances and the growth I had experienced, I realized it was now or never. I put in my 2 weeks' notice and threw myself into the business head first. The first few months were a whirlwind. I learned quickly that running a business wasn't just about selling products. It was about building a sustainable model, managing cash flow, and making strategic decisions. I learned about inventory management, customer retention, and how to deal with bad reviews. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I wanted to throw in the towel. But the adrenaline of creating something from nothing kept me going. Around that time, I also started getting a taste of what it was like to build a brand. I began creating more diverse products and collaborating with designers who shared my vision. We expanded our range from t-shirts to sweatshirts, hats, and even home decor. My business started to gain some legitimacy. And then, I received an email that changed everything. A well-known retailer in my niche reached out to me, expressing interest in carrying my products. I couldn't believe it. This was the kind of opportunity one had dreamed of when I first started, but I never thought it would come this soon. After negotiating terms, I signed a deal, and suddenly, my little online store was getting national exposure. The increase in orders was beyond anything I could have predicted, and I quickly had to scale up operations. At first, managing this new influx of sales felt like a roller coaster. There were growing pains as I adjusted to working with larger manufacturers and managing bigger logistics. But the key was having systems in place to scale. I hired a small team, outsourced tasks, and automated as much as possible. I learned to delegate instead of trying to do everything myself. And then, one day, it clicked. The brand wasn't just mine anymore. It was something bigger, something that connected with people in a way I hadn't anticipated. My designs had evolved into a full-on culture, and customers were engaging with the brand on social media, sharing photos, and posting about their products. The brand had become a community. Today, almost 5 years later, I'm running a multi-six-figure business with a small but incredible team. We've expanded into other markets and have a loyal customer base that continues to grow every year. I'm still learning, still making mistakes, and still figuring out how to scale even further. But the journey has been worth every sleepless night and every moment of doubt. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that entrepreneurship isn't about having the perfect plan from day one. It's about having the resilience to keep going when things don't go as planned and the humility to learn from your mistakes. The road is never linear, and it's filled with both failure and success. But with the right mindset, anything is possible. I've always been the type of person who was more inclined to hustle than to take the traditional path in life. I didn't go to a prestigious college, didn't grow up with connections, and I wasn't one of those people who had a clear vision of what I wanted to do since childhood. But I always knew that if I wanted anything out of life, I had to make it happen on my own. This is my journey of how I went from a broke 22-year-old living in my parents' basement to the owner of a successful online business that now generates over $100,000 in profit every month. It all started when I was about 19. I was working part-time at a local coffee shop while attending community college. To say I hated the work would be an understatement, but I had no other option at the time. My parents weren't financially stable enough to support me, and I didn't want to take on any more student loans than I had to. The pay was low, the hours were long, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more I was supposed to be doing with my life. One day, I was scrolling through Reddit during my break and came across a thread in which people were talking about how they were making money online. Some of them were selling stuff on eBay, others were creating content, and some were running e-commerce stores. It clicked. I had always been somewhat tech-savvy, and I had a deep interest in business, even though I hadn't really explored it much before. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I had to do something. So, I set a goal. I would learn how to make money online and turn it into a real business. The first few months were filled with frustration and failure. I tried dropshipping because it seemed like the simplest option at the time. I spent hours on YouTube watching tutorials, trying to build a store, and setting up Facebook ads. But I quickly realized how tough it was to get noticed in a saturated market. Every time I made a sale, I lost money on shipping and product costs. It was discouraging, to say the least. I took a step back and reassessed my strategy. I realized I needed a niche, something specific that I could cater to and truly understand. I had always been into fitness, so I started researching the fitness industry. I came across a product that seemed to have potential: resistance bands. They were small, lightweight, and didn't require much in terms of shipping or overhead costs. But even then, I didn't just want to sell any resistance bands. I wanted to offer a higher quality product that could set itself apart from the competition. I found a manufacturer overseas, negotiated a deal, and spent a few $1,000s on a small order to test the market. By the time my first batch of resistance bands arrived, I had already built a simple Shopify store. I wrote up a product description, took a few pictures of the bands, which weren't the best but did the job, and launched my first ad campaign. I didn't expect much. But to my surprise, my first sale came in within hours. I was ecstatic. That first $20 sale felt like I had won the lottery. And then the sales kept coming. Slowly but surely, my store began to generate a steady stream of income. I was making a few $100s a day, which was a massive improvement over my part-time job at the coffee shop. I realized that I needed to scale, but I couldn't do it alone. I started outsourcing certain tasks, like customer service and product fulfillment, to free up my time. I also started learning more about digital marketing, Facebook ads, Google ads, SEO, and applied that knowledge to my business. Things really started to pick up when I invested in influencer marketing. I reached out to fitness influencers on Instagram who had small but engaged followings, offering them a free set of my resistance bands in exchange for a review. The strategy worked better than I could have hoped. These influencers posted about my product, and their followers began buying in droves. My sales skyrocketed, and I quickly went from a few $100s a day to several thousand. But success didn't come without its own challenges. As I scaled my business, I ran into problems with inventory management, shipping delays, and keeping up with customer service. I had to learn to delegate more and trust others to handle certain aspects of the business. I hired a small team, including a virtual assistant to manage customer inquiries and a fulfillment center to handle shipping and inventory. One of the most difficult things I had to overcome was my own mindset. As I started making more money, I began to doubt myself. I had this constant fear that I was just one bad decision away from losing everything. I found myself overworking, obsessing over every little detail, and struggling with burnout. It was hard to admit, but I had to come to terms with the fact that I couldn't do everything on my own. I started reading more about entrepreneurship, mindset, and mental health, and I realized that I had to take better care of myself if I wanted to continue growing my business. I began working with a mentor who helped me shift my focus from purely making money to building a sustainable business. I also made sure to take time off to recharge, spend time with my family, and do the things that made me happy. Fast forward to today, and I'm running a business that's grown well beyond resistance bands. I now sell a variety of fitness-related products, including yoga mats, dumbbells, and apparel. I've expanded into international markets and have built a strong brand presence on social media. My team has grown to include several employees, and we're continuing to innovate and expand. But the journey hasn't been without its setbacks. I've had suppliers back out on me, I've faced technical issues with my website, and I've had to deal with some very unhappy customers at times. But each challenge has only made me more resilient. I've learned to be adaptable and to keep pushing forward, even when things get tough. One of the most rewarding parts of this journey has been seeing the impact my business has had on my customers. I get messages all the time from people telling me how my products have helped them improve their fitness or their overall health. It's humbling, and it reminds me why I started this in the first place. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. There were so many times when I thought about quitting, when I was broke, tired, and feeling like nothing was working. But I stuck with it, learned from my mistakes, and kept pushing forward. Today, I'm living the life I always dreamed of, and I'm grateful for every struggle and success that got me here. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone who's thinking about starting their own business, it would be this: don't give up when things get tough. The road is never easy, and there will be times when you feel like throwing in the towel. But the most successful entrepreneurs are the ones who persevere through the hard times, learn from their failures, and keep moving forward. I'm not perfect, and I still have a long way to go. But if a broke 22-year-old with no business experience can build something from scratch, then so can you. The key is to keep learning, keep hustling, and never give up. I've always believed that success doesn't come from having the perfect idea right away. It comes from trying, failing, adapting, and then finding a path that works for you. My entrepreneurial journey started when I was 24, working a corporate job that I hated, making decent money, but feeling completely unsatisfied. I was living in New York, hustling through my 9 to 5, and constantly hearing friends and coworkers talk about their side gigs and startup ideas. I envied them, but it never felt like I had the guts to leave the comfort of a steady paycheck. One night, I was catching up with a friend over drinks, and he asked me, "Why don't you just do it? Start something. Try something." That question stayed with me. I had no clue what I wanted to do, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to keep working in a job I hated for the next 30 years. So, I started brainstorming. I wanted to build something that wasn't just profitable but would also be meaningful to me. The first idea I had was a website that connected people who wanted to learn new skills with those who could teach them. Think a marketplace for learning. I spent weeks researching, putting together a business plan, and even talking to some potential users. I loved the idea. It felt fresh, and I thought it could be a game changer. The problem? I had no technical skills. I couldn't build a website myself, and hiring developers was way out of my budget. I decided to approach the whole thing from a different angle and hired a freelance developer to build the platform. I didn't have the money to pay up front, so I offered to give him a percentage of the business. He seemed to like the idea, and we started working together. But after a few months of back and forth, we hit a roadblock. The site wasn't where I wanted it to be. The design was clunky, and the user experience was terrible. I spent hours tweaking the features, trying to make it work, but it felt like I was just pushing a boulder up a hill. I felt defeated. This was my first real attempt at entrepreneurship, and I thought I had failed before I even got started. But I couldn't let it go. I kept telling myself, don't quit now. After a few months of frustration, I decided to cut my losses and pivot. I had learned a lot from that first failure, and rather than walking away from the entrepreneurial dream, I decided to go in a completely different direction. That's when I stumbled upon the idea of creating an online store for niche products. I had a deep interest in fitness and wellness, and I realized that there was a market for high-quality, eco-friendly workout gear. People were willing to spend more on products that were better for the planet, and I figured there was a way to make money while promoting sustainability. I went all in. I started sourcing products, creating a website, and marketing it online. I spent countless nights watching YouTube tutorials, learning about e-commerce, SEO, and social media marketing. My first sale came 2 weeks after launching, and it felt like a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The next few months were a whirlwind. There were days I'd make 0 sales, and there were days I'd make a handful of orders. But something about the business felt different. I was learning fast, and I had a sense that I was building something that people actually wanted. The biggest challenge was balancing my full-time job with running the business. There were nights when I'd come home from work and spend 5 hours packing orders, managing customer emails, and updating my website. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of late-night moments when I wondered if I was crazy to think this would work. But I kept going. I reached out to fitness influencers, offered them free products in exchange for reviews, and slowly but surely, word started to spread. After about 6 months, I hit a breakthrough. I landed a feature on a popular fitness blog, and that brought in a ton of traffic. Orders started coming in faster than I could keep up with. I knew then that I was onto something. By the time I was 26, I made the decision to quit my corporate job and focus on my business full-time. It was terrifying. I didn't have a big cushion of savings, and I knew that if this didn't work, I'd be back at square one. But I had to take the leap. There was no other option. Fast forward a few years, and the business grew beyond what I ever imagined. The first year I went full-time, I made less than I did at my corporate job, but I was happier than I'd ever been. By year 2, I was making more than I had at my 9 to 5, and by year 3, the business had grown enough that I hired my first employee. We now have a small team of 6, and we've expanded our product line to include everything from workout accessories to sustainable activewear. Looking back, I realized that the biggest thing that helped me succeed was persistence. I could have quit after the first failure, after the second, or even the third. I could have thrown in the towel when I realized I didn't have the technical skills to make my first idea work. But I didn't. I kept trying, adapting, and learning from my mistakes. Every failure was a lesson that helped me move forward. There were also moments of doubt, times when I wondered if it was all worth it, if the sleepless nights and constant stress were going to pay off. But every time I hit a roadblock, I remembered why I started. I wanted to create something that had meaning, that solved a problem, and that was built from the ground up. I wanted to be in control of my own destiny. Today, my company is thriving. It's not just about the money anymore. I'm proud of what I've built, and I know I'm creating something that will outlast me. But more importantly, I've learned that being an entrepreneur is about so much more than success or failure. It's about the journey, the highs and the lows, the learning, the growth, the reinvention. And, in the end, the most important thing is not what you build, but how you build it and who you become along the way. So, to anyone reading this who feels stuck, or scared, or unsure of whether they should take the leap, do it. The path won't be easy, and you'll face more obstacles than you can imagine. But if you're passionate about what you're doing and willing to push through the tough times, it can be the most rewarding experience of your life. It certainly has been for me. The key is to keep moving, even when it seems impossible. You'll get there eventually, and you'll be stronger for it. Just don't quit. This is the story of how I went from a broke college student living in a cramped apartment to the founder of a small but profitable tech startup. It wasn't an overnight success, and there were more failures than I'd like to admit, But eventually, things clicked. Here's how it happened. It all started in my sophomore year of college. I was studying computer science, but I didn't really have much direction. I loved coding, but I didn't know how to apply it to anything. My parents were supportive, but they weren't exactly thrilled about me pursuing a non-traditional career path. They were from a small town where the expectations were clear: get a degree, get a job in something stable, and settle down. But I had bigger dreams than that. I spent most of my days in the dormitory, working on random projects, learning new programming languages, and constantly tweaking things. I wasn't social, and I didn't party much, but I was determined to build something. I didn't know what yet, but I just had a feeling that I could create something that would change my life. My breakthrough came one evening after an all-nighter. I had just finished a new coding project, a simple mobile app designed to help students organize their class notes. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was clean, functional, and had potential. I showed it to a couple of my friends, and they liked it. That was my first win. I posted the app on a couple of forums to see if anyone else found it useful, and within a week, it had gained some traction. But here's the thing. I was a full-time student with barely any money. I didn't have any marketing experience, and the little funding I had was drained by textbooks and late-night pizza. So, I did what any broke college student would do. I used free tools and platforms to grow the app. I set up a website on a free hosting service, promoted it on Reddit and Twitter, and hoped for the best. It worked to an extent. The app got around 100 downloads in the first month, and although that didn't sound like much, it was enough to make me realize I had something worth pursuing. The next few months were filled with late nights and long weekends of coding and bug fixing. I didn't have much guidance, but I kept reading articles online, watching YouTube tutorials, and learning as much as I could. Eventually, I added some features to the app, like the ability to share notes with other students and a built-in calendar to track assignments. These small improvements made the app a lot more useful, and the downloads started to pick up. Soon, I was getting feedback from students in different universities and schools across the country. In the summer of my junior year, I decided it was time to take things more seriously. I reached out to a few friends who were also interested in tech and pitching them my idea. I knew I couldn't do it alone if I wanted to turn this into a real business. I didn't have much money to pay them, but I offered equity in the project. I got two of them on board: Ryan, who was great at design, and Sarah, who had a business background. The three of us started meeting regularly, discussing features, marketing strategies, and how to take the app to the next level. We launched a beta version of the app, and this time, we made sure it was on all the right platforms. We signed up for Google's Firebase to host the app's backend for free, and we used social media to drum up some attention. We even applied to some startup incubators, though we didn't expect much. In a stroke of luck, we got accepted into one of them, a small but reputable program that offered mentorship, office space, and a little seed money. That's when things really started to change. Being part of the incubator was a game changer. We had access to experienced mentors who had been through the same grind. They helped us refine our pitch, guided us through fundraising, and introduced us to some investors. More importantly, they helped us see that the app we had been building wasn't just a product for students. It had the potential to be used by professionals in a wide variety of fields. We started focusing on how our app could help people organize and share information in a more efficient way, whether it was for work projects or personal life. With a clearer vision, we began to push the app beyond just college students. We redesigned the user interface to appeal to a more general audience and added new features, like task management and collaboration tools. At this point, we had a small but dedicated user base, and we decided to launch a paid version of the app with premium features. The first month of offering the paid version was terrifying. We didn't know if anyone would actually pay for it. But slowly, people started subscribing. Word of mouth spread, and more users came in. Then, the big break came. One of the investors we had met through the incubator introduced us to a venture capital firm that was looking to invest in startups focused on productivity tools. We pitched our app, and after a series of meetings and negotiations, they offered us a seed round of funding. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to help us hire a small team of developers and marketing specialists. The funding allowed us to take the app to the next level. We revamped the code, fixed all the bugs, and released a more polished version. We also hired a part-time marketing person who helped us push our message to a broader audience. We ran Facebook ads, wrote blog posts, and reached out to influencers. Slowly but surely, The app gained more traction. We were featured in tech blogs and got some attention from bigger companies. Our user base grew from a few thousand to over 50,000 in the span of 6 months. By the time I graduated, our app was making enough money to support our team, and we were starting to consider long-term goals. We expanded into new markets, offered enterprise-level solutions, and even started to consider international growth. The success of the app wasn't instant, but it was built on a foundation of hard work, learning from mistakes, and constantly iterating on the product. Fast forward to today, and we're still a small company, but we've grown considerably. We've expanded our team, raised additional funding, and have some exciting things lined up for the future. The journey hasn't been easy, and I've had my fair share of setbacks, but looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. The biggest lesson I learned is that success isn't a straight path. It's a mix of hard work, perseverance, and being open to change. There's no magic formula, but if you stay focused, learn from your mistakes, and keep pushing forward, you'll eventually get where you want to be. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I was always the kind of person who hated working for someone else. I wanted to be my own boss, make my own rules, and build something from the ground up. But let me take you through the journey of how I went from a broke college grad working a dead-end job to owning a small but growing tech company. It all started right after I graduated from university. Like most fresh grads, I was full of dreams and high expectations, but reality hit hard when I started looking for jobs. Despite having a degree in computer science, I ended up working as a customer service rep at a call center. It was not the career I had envisioned for myself. The job was monotonous, and I felt stuck. I remember telling myself that this was just temporary, that soon I would find something more fulfilling. Months passed, and I was still answering calls, dealing with angry customers, and feeling more and more disillusioned. But during that time, I had a lot of free moments, and I spent those moments coding. I would build small apps, play around with new technologies, and try to improve my skills. I didn't know it at the time, but this side hustle would be the foundation of my future. One day, as I was scrolling through Reddit, I saw a post about a new startup competition. The prize was a sizable cash reward, and more importantly, the chance to pitch your idea to top investors. I was intrigued, but also nervous. I had no business experience, no network, and no funding. All I had was a few small projects I had worked on in my spare time. But the idea of finally doing something of my own, something that could change my life, made me throw caution to the wind. I decided to enter the competition. I spent every evening after work working on a project that I had been toying with for a while, a task management app that would use machine learning to predict deadlines and prioritize tasks based on a user's habits. It was a simple idea, but it was something I knew would solve a problem I had experienced in my own life. My goal was to make an app that was intuitive and helpful, not just another complicated productivity tool. I didn't have much time, but I pushed through the long hours. There were nights when I barely slept, only stopping to eat and then getting back to coding. I reached out to a few online communities for feedback and advice, but I didn't have any formal mentorship. I was flying solo, learning as I went. After weeks of sleepless nights, I had a working prototype. The app wasn't perfect, but it was functional. I submitted my entry to the competition, fully expecting to get rejected. But to my surprise, I got an email a week later saying I had been selected as one of the finalists. I couldn't believe it. I had no idea what I was doing, but somehow, I was moving forward. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. I spent hours refining my pitch, learning how to talk about my project without sounding like a total novice. I was terrified. On the day of the pitch event, I remember standing in front of a room full of investors and startup mentors, feeling completely out of my element. But when it was my turn, I stepped up to the podium and spoke with everything I had. I talked about my experience with productivity apps, my frustration with existing tools, and why my app could be the solution. I didn't win the competition, but something incredible happened. One of the investors took an interest in my idea. He approached me after the pitch and asked if I wanted to meet up to discuss it further. I could barely contain my excitement. We met for coffee the next week, and he offered to invest in my app. He didn't offer much, just enough to help me take the next step, but it was enough to get me started. With that initial investment, I was able to quit my job at the call center and focus full-time on my startup. It was scary as hell. I didn't know anything about running a business, and I had no real support system. I rented a small office space, bought some second-hand equipment, and set to work. I spent most of my days coding, while also learning everything I could about business, marketing, and finance. I took online courses, read books, and joined startup communities where I could ask questions without feeling embarrassed. In the early days, it was just me working on everything. I was the CEO, CTO, and janitor all rolled into one. I had to learn how to manage my time, deal with clients, and juggle the various tasks that came with running a company. But as I made progress, I began to see the potential of what I was building. Slowly, users started signing up for the app. It wasn't a viral sensation, but there was steady growth. I could see people were getting value out of it. I realized that my first mistake had been thinking that success would come overnight. It didn't. But I kept pushing forward, constantly improving the app, fixing bugs, and responding to feedback. After a few months, I was able to hire a small team, 2 developers, a designer, and a marketing person. With their help, the app continued to evolve, and we started attracting more serious users. Fast forward to today, and my company has grown into something I never imagined possible. We've expanded our product offerings, and our user base has grown to over 100,000 active users. We've secured more rounds of funding, and we've even started collaborating with larger companies in the tech industry. It hasn't been easy, and there have been countless setbacks along the way. I've lost sleep, made mistakes, and had moments where I questioned if it was all worth it. But looking back, I'm incredibly proud of what I've built. What I've learned from this journey is that entrepreneurship isn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about taking risks, learning as you go, and persisting when things get tough. I could have stayed in my safe, boring job at the call center, but I would have never known what I was capable of. The key to success isn't having everything figured out from the start. It's about starting with what you have and pushing forward, even when it feels like you're swimming against the current. I'm still learning every day, but now I'm at a place where I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. And it all started with a single idea and the willingness to take a leap of faith. If you're reading this and you're stuck in a job you hate or you're unsure about pursuing your own business, my advice is simple: take the first step. You don't have to have all the answers, but you do have to be willing to start. It's a long, difficult road, but if you stick with it, you just might surprise yourself. I want to share my journey of going from a broke college dropout to running a successful tech startup. It wasn't easy, but I'll walk you through how I got here. I was always the type of kid who had a side hustle. In high school, I would buy and sell old video games and electronics, making enough money to fund my hobbies and occasionally help out with bills at home. But as I grew older, I got a reality check. My family wasn't financially stable, and there wasn't a clear roadmap to success. My parents were great, but we were living paycheck to paycheck. So when I graduated from high school, the thought of going to college seemed like the only option, even though it wasn't something I was passionate about. I ended up enrolling in a computer science program at a state university, mostly because it felt like the right thing to do, and I figured it would lead to a steady job. But I quickly realized that the traditional school route wasn't for me. I had already been building websites and learning how to code in my spare time, but what they were teaching in class felt outdated. My friends and I would joke about how we could learn faster on YouTube or through trial and error than we ever could in those lectures. The curriculum felt like a money-making machine for the school rather than a place where real skills were being taught. So, midway through my second year, I dropped out. My parents were furious. They had sacrificed a lot to get me into college, and now I was telling them I was quitting. To make matters worse, I didn't have a concrete plan in place. I was terrified. I spent the next few months working a part-time job at a coffee shop just to make ends meet while I tried to figure out what to do next. I used this time to really immerse myself in coding. I knew that if I could build something cool, it might open up doors. So, I started working on a web app idea I had in my head for months, a platform that could help small business owners streamline their inventory and sales management. There were plenty of apps out there, but most of them were way too complicated or overpriced for small businesses to use. I wasn't a designer, and I didn't have any funding. I had no idea how to turn this idea into a real business, but I kept at it. I spent countless hours after my shifts at the coffee shop learning everything I could about building software, designing user interfaces, and figuring out how to launch a product. I remember spending weeks in front of my computer, teaching myself HTML, CSS, and JavaScript through free tutorials. It wasn't glamorous, and I made tons of mistakes. But I was learning by doing, and I was determined to make something work. Around 6 months in, I launched the beta version of my app. I didn't have much, but I was excited to see if anyone else would think it was useful. I sent out cold emails to small business owners in my area, offering them free access in exchange for feedback. To my surprise, I got a few responses. A couple of people tried the app and told me what they liked and didn't like. Their feedback was invaluable, but I also realized that I needed a lot more than just the basics to make this business work. I started looking for a co-founder. I knew I was good at building the product, but I had no idea how to market it or handle the business side of things. I reached out to a few people in local startup meetups and online forums, and eventually, I met Sarah, a marketer with a background in sales. We hit it off right away, and she seemed just as passionate about the product as I was. At this point, we were both working full-time jobs and pouring every spare moment into our startup. We decided to launch a crowdfunding campaign to raise money for the next phase of development. Our goal was modest $10,000. To our surprise, we exceeded that by over 50%. The money wasn't much, but it gave us the confidence we needed to take our startup more seriously. With some funds in the bank, we started hiring freelancers to help with design and additional development. We also started building a small team to handle customer service and marketing. The next few months were a whirlwind. We were constantly iterating on the app, fixing bugs, and updating features. We also focused heavily on customer acquisition, leveraging social media, content marketing, and partnerships with local businesses. We even got a few press mentions, which helped with visibility. But, as with any startup, things weren't smooth sailing. We hit a major roadblock when we tried to scale our infrastructure. Our servers crashed multiple times under the weight of new users, and we didn't have enough money to hire experienced engineers to fix the problem. I remember pulling all-nighters with our small team, trying to get everything back online before customers started canceling. We lost some users during that period, and it felt like a major setback. But we learned a lot about handling growth and the importance of infrastructure. As we kept pushing forward, we started seeing real traction. Our user base grew, and more businesses were signing up for our platform. But I felt like we needed more funding, more exposure, and more credibility. So, I made the decision to apply to a startup accelerator program. We were accepted, and that opened up doors we hadn't even imagined. We received mentorship from seasoned entrepreneurs, access to a network of investors, and the resources to really scale the business. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. We still faced many challenges, including competition, the pressure of scaling, and the constant worry about running out of cash. But every time we overcame a hurdle, we became more confident in our abilities to succeed. We made strategic pivots, improved our product based on user feedback, and made sure we were always focused on providing real value to our customers. Fast forward a few years, and we're now a team of 30-plus employees, with a solid product, steady revenue, and a growing customer base. We've expanded internationally and raised multiple rounds of funding from venture capital firms. The road was long and hard, but the experience has been incredibly rewarding. Looking back, I often think about the decision to drop out of college. It wasn't a smooth journey, and I had many moments of doubt. But I believe that taking the risk and pursuing what I was passionate about was the best decision I ever made. There's no blueprint for success, and sometimes the best thing you can do is take the leap, learn from your mistakes, and keep moving forward. If you're someone who feels stuck or uncertain, my advice is to keep pushing forward. It won't be easy, but if you stay committed and focus on what you want to achieve, you'll get there. The key is to never stop learning, never stop iterating, and always keep your eyes on the bigger picture. You can make it happen. This isn't the end of my story, it's just the beginning. I still have big dreams for our company, and I'm excited about the next phase of growth. Thanks for reading. I still remember the day I made the decision to quit my 9-to-5 job and start my own business. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I was sitting at my desk, staring at the computer screen, feeling the weight of the endless spreadsheets and emails that never seemed to stop. I had been working at a mid-level marketing agency for 5 years, grinding away at campaigns that didn't excite me anymore, working for clients I didn't care about. Sure, I made decent money, but deep down, I knew I was never going to achieve what I truly wanted: freedom, creativity, and control over my own life. I had been thinking about entrepreneurship for a long time. I had an idea in my head for a startup, a niche product I was passionate about, but fear held me back. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of giving up the security of a paycheck. I spent countless nights reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and talking to other entrepreneurs who had made the leap. I thought about the worst-case scenario constantly: losing all my savings, getting stuck in debt, or failing so miserably that I'd have to crawl back to a regular job. But I also thought about the possibility of success. What if I could make this work? What if I could build something meaningful? That morning, I made a decision. I drafted my resignation letter. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. I had been saving money for over a year, cutting back on unnecessary expenses, and putting aside as much as I could. I knew the risk, but I also knew I couldn't keep living a life of what-ifs. I handed in my resignation letter that afternoon. Fast forward to the first few weeks of running my own business. To say it was overwhelming would be an understatement. I quickly realized that there were so many things I hadn't prepared for. It wasn't just about having a good idea. It was about managing everything: marketing, sales, accounting, customer service, and even office space. I had no idea how to properly manage my finances or how to handle the legal side of things. And that's when reality hit me like a ton of bricks. This was not going to be easy. At first, I tried to do everything myself. I thought that I could save money by handling everything from website design to customer service to bookkeeping. But quickly, I found myself stretched too thin. I was working 18-hour days, feeling like I wasn't making any progress. My product was good, but I didn't know how to sell it. I had no clear marketing strategy and was basically throwing darts at a dartboard, hoping something would stick. I was frustrated. I felt like I was drowning. That's when I decided to hire a mentor. I knew I needed guidance from someone who had been through the same challenges I was facing. The first mentor I found was a local entrepreneur who had successfully launched a similar product. I reached out to him, and to my surprise, he agreed to meet with me. The first meeting was eye-opening. He didn't give me a magic solution, but he did share his experiences, his failures, and his lessons learned. One thing he told me stuck with me: don't try to do everything yourself. You need to build a team, even if it's just 1 or 2 people in the beginning. You can't do it all alone. That advice changed everything. I immediately started looking for people to help me. I brought on a part-time graphic designer to improve the look of my website and social media, and a virtual assistant to help with administrative tasks. I also hired a freelance copywriter to work on my product descriptions and marketing materials. Suddenly, I had a team, even though it was small, and I was able to focus on what mattered most: growing the business. The next few months were a roller coaster. Some days felt like we were on the brink of success, and other days, it seemed like everything was falling apart. I launched my product, and the initial sales were slow. I was disheartened, but I refused to give up. I spent time talking to my customers, getting feedback, and improving my product based on their suggestions. I started to learn about digital marketing, Facebook ads, Google ads, email marketing, and I began to experiment with different strategies to increase visibility. Then one day, something clicked. I had been running a Facebook ad campaign targeting a specific audience, and the results were finally starting to show. Sales began to trickle in, then pour in. My website traffic skyrocketed, and I was getting more and more inquiries from potential customers. I couldn't believe it. I was starting to make real money. But the journey didn't stop there. As the business grew, so did the challenges. I had to deal with supply chain issues, inventory management, and scaling up operations. I was learning new things every day, but the excitement of seeing my business grow made it all worth it. Over the next year, my business continued to grow, and I learned how to better manage my time and delegate tasks. I also started investing in more tools and software that helped streamline operations, like project management tools and accounting software. By the end of that year, I had hired a full-time team of 5 people, each with their own area of expertise. We were expanding, and it felt like a dream. But with success came new problems. As my business grew, so did the competition. I had to find ways to stay ahead of the curve, innovate, and continue offering value to my customers. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I felt like I was on the verge of burnout. But I pushed through, knowing that this was the price of success. One of the hardest lessons I learned in this journey was that growth doesn't come without sacrifice. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. I put my personal life on the back burner more times than I care to admit. But I also knew that this was a temporary phase. The sacrifices I made would eventually pay off. Looking back on my entrepreneurial journey, I can't help but feel grateful for all the challenges and setbacks. They were the lessons that helped me grow, both personally and professionally. Today, my business is thriving, and I have the freedom I always dreamed of. I work on projects that excite me, and I'm surrounded by a team of people who share my vision. The road to entrepreneurship was anything but easy, but it was worth every step. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone thinking about starting their own business, it's this: don't be afraid to take the leap. The fear of failure will always be there, but it's how you respond to it that makes all the difference. Surround yourself with people who can help you, learn from your mistakes, and keep pushing forward. Success doesn't happen overnight, but with persistence, passion, and the willingness to learn, you can achieve anything. I was never the kind of person who imagined they'd end up running their own business. Growing up in a small town, I always thought the best I could do was get a decent job and maybe, if I was lucky, climb a few rungs on the corporate ladder. But sometimes life has a funny way of throwing curveballs that change everything. My story isn't one of sudden success or the overnight millionaire type you see in social media ads. It's a tale of persistence, failure, and a little bit of luck, and how my passion for something completely unrelated to business led to creating a company I'm proud of today. It all started in my early 20s. I had just graduated from college with a degree in environmental science. My plan was to work for an NGO or a government agency focused on sustainability. But like a lot of recent grads, reality hit hard when I couldn't find a job in my field. I spent a few months working retail to make ends meet while sending out applications and attending networking events. Despite my degree, it felt like every door I tried to open was locked. One evening, while working at a local coffee shop, I got talking to a guy who had come in every day for the past few weeks. He was a bit older than me and clearly well off. We started chatting about what I wanted to do with my life, and I told him about my struggle to find work in my field. He listened patiently and then dropped a bombshell that would change my life forever. Have you ever thought about starting your own business? I laughed it off. I had no experience running a business. I didn't have any capital. And, honestly, I had no idea where to even start. But he was persistent. He told me about his own journey, how he started with nothing, made plenty of mistakes, but eventually found success in a completely unrelated field. He said that if I was passionate enough about something, I could make a business out of it, even if it wasn't exactly what I had planned. That conversation stuck with me. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to make a huge decision that would shift the direction of my life. At the time, I had been obsessed with DIY projects. It started with small home improvement stuff, fixing things around my apartment, building furniture, and tackling random repair projects. Eventually, I started making videos of my projects and posting them on YouTube. I wasn't expecting anything big to come out of it. I simply enjoyed sharing what I had learned and getting feedback from the small community of DIY enthusiasts I had built online. Over the months, my channel grew. It wasn't massive, but it was steady. I began getting sponsorship offers for the products I was using in my videos, which was a nice side income. I still didn't think of it as a business, though. It was just a hobby. But one day, as I was finishing up a project for a sponsored video, it hit me. People didn't just want to see how I did things. They wanted to know where to get the tools and materials I was using. The idea of creating a platform for DIY enthusiasts, a place where they could find all the tools and materials for the projects I featured in my videos, suddenly seemed like a brilliant one. I started researching. I looked into e-commerce platforms, suppliers, and how to run an online store. I had no business experience, so it was a lot of trial and error. I spent countless hours watching YouTube tutorials, reading articles, and taking free online courses about running an e-commerce business. But despite all the research, the more I learned, the more I realized how much I didn't know. The first mistake I made was rushing into things. I spent a significant amount of money upfront buying inventory, thinking that I could quickly turn it around and make a profit. The products were all in a storage unit before I even had a website up. I was too eager, and it showed. When I finally launched the website, it wasn't as smooth as I thought it would be. The inventory didn't move as quickly as I had hoped. Shipping costs were higher than expected, and I was losing money on every order. But instead of giving up, I doubled down. I revisited my business plan, rebranded the website, and focused on building a community around it. I started running promotions and offered advice on DIY projects through my YouTube channel, always linking back to my store. Slowly, things started picking up. The customer base grew steadily, but it wasn't until I fully embraced content marketing that the business truly began to take off. I started collaborating with other DIY creators. Some were big, some were small, but they all had loyal followings. Together, we created content that featured my products, showcasing how they could help make DIY projects easier. It was a win-win. They got new content to share, and I got exposure to their audiences. At the same time, I realized that I needed to improve my product selection. Initially, I had focused only on the most popular items, but customers wanted niche products as well, specific tools or rare materials that were harder to find. I started reaching out to suppliers and manufacturers, trying to source these unique items. It wasn't always easy, but I managed to get better deals and expand my offerings. A year into it, I was finally seeing real profit. The first few months of being in the red felt like a lifetime, but as my reputation grew, so did my sales. There were still plenty of obstacles, but by this point, I had learned a lot about logistics, customer service, and how to market a product online. As my business grew, I hired a small team. I brought on a customer service specialist, a content manager, and eventually a logistics coordinator to handle the growing volume of orders. This was one of the scariest moves I made because it meant that I was now responsible for not just my own livelihood, but for others as well. But it also meant I could focus on scaling the business, which is exactly what I did. Today, my company is a thriving online marketplace for DIY tools and materials. We've expanded beyond just selling products. We now offer video tutorials, project guides, and even live workshops. I no longer run my YouTube channel, but my business continues to use content as a way to engage with customers and expand our reach. We've even developed our own line of branded tools that are now sold exclusively on our site. Looking back, I never would have thought that my love for DIY would lead to me building a company. There were so many times I almost gave up, but I'm glad I didn't. Entrepreneurship isn't glamorous, and it's certainly not easy. But for anyone thinking about starting their own business, I'd say this. If you're passionate about something and you're willing to put in the work, you can make it happen. It won't be a straight path, and you will stumble. But keep going. The lessons you learn along the way will make the hard times worth it. And who knows? You might just find yourself in a place you never imagined. And for anyone out there still wondering if they have what it takes, I'll tell you what my friend told me all those years ago. If you're passionate about it, go for it. You never know where it could lead. I'm living proof of that advice. I had always been the kind of person who wanted to make it big. My dream was simple. I wanted to create something that would impact people's lives in a real way, not just in a fleeting sense. But like most people with big dreams, I had no idea where to start. It all began during my final year of college. I was studying marketing, and I had a pretty average academic record. I was never the star student, but I had this drive inside me to do something that would stand out. I spent more time thinking about my future than actually studying for exams, which I now realize wasn't the smartest move, but it didn't stop me from dreaming. At the time, I had a friend named Jake who was in the same boat. He was a tech guy, always tinkering with gadgets and talking about coding like it was second nature. We'd stay up late at night, drinking cheap beer, discussing ideas we had for apps, websites, and software. We both wanted to be entrepreneurs but had zero practical experience. We didn't know what we didn't know. One night, over a particularly long conversation, Jake said something that stuck with me. We need to find a problem, something people actually need. Not just something we think is cool. People will pay for a solution to their problems, but not for something they don't need. I had no clue what kind of problems people had, but I wanted to find out. So we started researching. We spent the next couple of months reading through blogs, watching YouTube videos, and interviewing people. We also started attending startup events and networking like crazy. Eventually, we came across an interesting problem. People were struggling with their personal finances. They weren't keeping track of their spending, and even when they did, they had no clear idea of how to budget. The more we looked into it, the more we realized that this wasn't just a small issue. Personal finance was a massive problem for people, and the tools out there weren't doing a great job of addressing it. At that point, Jake and I decided to create an app that would help people manage their money. We had no background in finance, but we were passionate about solving this problem, and we knew we could learn. I remember the day we decided to go all in. It was one of those moments where you know that everything is about to change, for better or worse. We didn't have any investors, just a small loan I'd taken out and a lot of faith in ourselves. We named our startup BudgetMate. The first few months were rough. Jake did most of the development work while I focused on marketing and reaching out to potential users. We went through countless versions of the app, each one filled with bugs and glitches. But we kept pushing forward, learning from our mistakes. We were determined to build something people actually wanted to use. We didn't have a marketing budget, so we did everything ourselves. I learned how to build a website, write copy, and optimize for search engines. Jake spent hours on forums and Reddit, asking questions and getting feedback from potential users. Slowly but surely, we started to get a little traction. But traction didn't mean success. Our app was still not perfect, and the feedback from users was mixed. Some loved it, but others thought it was too complicated or just didn't meet their needs. That's when we realized we needed to pivot. We spent the next 6 months reworking the app, taking into account every piece of feedback we received. We simplified the interface, made it more user-friendly, and added features like automatic transaction categorization. We even brought in a financial advisor to help us make sure we were on the right track. The next time we launched, we had something that actually worked. Users were signing up, and they were actually staying. But the problem was that we still weren't making any money. We had no clear business model, and our expenses were piling up. I remember one night, sitting in front of our tiny office desk, wondering if we were going to have to shut it all down. That's when Jake came up with the idea of offering a freemium model. We would keep the basic features of the app free and charge for advanced features, like an financial analysis and premium support. It was a risk, but it felt like the right move. It was a turning point. The new business model worked. Slowly but surely, users started paying for the premium features. We were finally making money, but it was still a grind. There were months when I didn't know if we'd make enough to cover our expenses, and there were days when I wanted to give up. But we kept going because we had no choice. By the end of the year, BudgetMate had grown to 50,000 active users, and we were starting to get attention from investors. We were no longer just a small startup struggling to survive. We were a company that had a real shot at becoming something bigger. The next couple of years were a blur. We scaled up, hired more people, and started getting serious traction in the personal finance space. We partnered with banks and other financial institutions to integrate their services into our app. We made our first acquisition, another small startup with a great budgeting tool that we could integrate into BudgetMate. Everything was moving faster than I had ever imagined. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There were setbacks, legal battles, and moments when I doubted myself. There were days when I wanted to quit and walk away, but I couldn't. I had built something from the ground up, and I wasn't about to give up on it now. Eventually, we got acquired by a larger financial tech company, which was both exciting and terrifying. The payout was life-changing, but the responsibility was even bigger. The company I had built had become part of something much larger than I had ever imagined. Today, I'm no longer involved in the day-to-day operations of BudgetMate, but I still think about those early days. The late nights, the mistakes, the struggles, all of it was worth it. It wasn't an easy road, but it taught me more about business, life, and myself than I could have ever imagined. The biggest lesson I've learned through this entire journey is that success doesn't come from having a great idea. It comes from persistence, learning from your failures, and never giving up. You won't always know the answers, but if you're willing to put in the work and stay focused on solving real problems, success will eventually follow. Looking back, I can't believe how far we've come. It feels like a dream, but it's real. And now, I'm ready for the next challenge. Because in the end, that's what being an entrepreneur is all about. Constantly pushing forward, no matter how tough it gets. I remember the day like it was yesterday. I had just turned 25, was fresh out of college, and feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. Everyone around me seemed to have their lives figured out, while I was still fumbling through my early years trying to figure out what I wanted to do with mine. I didn't want the conventional 9-to-5 grind that everyone around me seemed to embrace. I wanted to build something that was mine. Something that would allow me to escape the monotony of a cubicle life. But what? I didn't grow up in a family of entrepreneurs. My parents were hardworking folks with traditional jobs. My mom was a teacher, and my dad worked in sales. They were both passionate about what they did, but they never ran their own businesses. So, this idea of being an entrepreneur felt like stepping into the unknown, like walking into a foggy forest with no map or compass. After a couple of years trying and failing in different ventures, I finally hit on an idea that stuck. It wasn't some groundbreaking invention or innovative software. It was something more straightforward. I decided to start a small online store selling customized t-shirts. I know, it sounds basic, but hear me out. I figured I could tap into the growing trend of personalized fashion. The market was booming, and I thought, why not carve out a little piece for myself? At the time, I didn't have a huge budget. My student loans were still hanging over me, and I wasn't exactly swimming in disposable income. I started with a basic Shopify store and some simple designs I mocked up using free tools. I ordered a small batch of shirts from a print-on-demand service and waited. I wasn't expecting much, but at least I felt like I was doing something. The first few months were a blur of marketing, social media, and getting my name out there. I posted on Instagram, ran Facebook ads, and tried every trick in the book. And then, a breakthrough. A blog I had never heard of reached out to me. They featured my shirts in an article about trendy, up-and-coming fashion brands. The traffic surged overnight. Suddenly, I was getting orders, and not just from friends and family. People from all over the country started ordering my shirts. It felt like a dream. But as my business grew, I quickly realized it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. With every new order came new problems. The first major challenge was fulfillment. As orders started piling up, I quickly realized that working with a print-on-demand company meant I had little control over production times. Sometimes, shirts would take weeks to ship out, and customers weren't exactly thrilled with the delays. My reputation started to take a hit, and I knew I had to fix it. I couldn't afford to hire a team or rent warehouse space, so I looked for other ways to streamline the process. I researched local printers and set up a system where I could produce shirts in batches. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. Then came the next hurdle, marketing. By now, I had learned a thing or two about paid ads, but they weren't giving me the return I needed. I realized I had to start building a community around my brand, not just sell shirts. I began collaborating with influencers, running giveaways, and engaging more directly with customers on social media. Slowly but surely, my brand started to gain traction. People weren't just buying shirts. They were tagging me in photos, sharing their own designs, and becoming part of my brand story. But even then, I wasn't fully in the clear. As the business grew, so did the complexity. I had to manage inventory, handle customer service, negotiate with suppliers, and deal with all the other logistics that come with running a business. I was working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. It felt like I was drowning. It wasn't sustainable, and I was burning out fast. I reached a breaking point one night when I was on the phone with a supplier who had messed up an order. It was the third mistake in a row, and I was furious. I had no time to fix it. The customer was angry, and I had to figure out how to keep them happy. As I hung up the phone, I realized I couldn't keep going at this pace. I was making money, yes, but I was sacrificing my mental health and well-being in the process. That's when I made one of the hardest decisions of my life. I decided to scale back. I paused my social media campaigns, stopped taking on new designs, and spent a few months revamping my processes. I brought on my first employee, someone who could help manage customer service and handle order fulfillment. I outsourced the marketing to a small agency and focused on what I was good at, product development and brand building. It wasn't easy. There were days when I doubted my decision. I missed the excitement of constant growth, and there were moments when it felt like I was giving up. But looking back, it was the best decision I could have made. Taking that step back allowed me to take control of my business again. I could breathe. I had time to think. And most importantly, I started enjoying the process again. Fast forward 2 years, and my business is thriving. We've expanded to offer other products like custom hats, mugs, and posters. We've hired a team of 5 full-time employees, and we've built a loyal customer base. My brand is known for quality, reliability, and a sense of community. I'm no longer working 18-hour days, and I have a team that I trust to handle the day-to-day operations. I'm also making more money than I ever imagined possible. Looking back, I can see how far I've come. From those early days of fumbling through social media posts and working out of my tiny apartment to running a legitimate business with employees and a growing customer base. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but it was worth it. I didn't get here by trying to take shortcuts or chasing after the latest trends. I got here by focusing on what mattered most, building a brand that people loved and cared about. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, here's my advice. Don't expect it to be easy, and don't expect it to happen overnight. You'll have doubts, you'll face challenges, and you'll make mistakes. But don't let that stop you. Keep learning, keep adapting, and keep pushing forward. The road won't always be smooth, but it will be worth it. There's no greater feeling than being able to wake up every day and know that you're in control of your own destiny. I don't have all the answers, but I've learned one thing for sure. The journey is as important as the destination. And that's the story of how I went from being just another college graduate with no direction to building a business that I'm proud of. It wasn't easy, but it was my dream, and I fought for it every step of the way. I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. Growing up, I always considered myself more of a dreamer than a doer, someone who had big ideas but no real plan to execute them. I had always admired successful people who turned their passions into businesses, but it seemed like a world far removed from mine. My journey to becoming an entrepreneur was not smooth. It was filled with moments of doubt, failure, and learning the hard way. But looking back now, I wouldn't change a thing. Here's the story of how I ended up building my own business. I was raised in a small suburban town in the Midwest, where the most exciting thing to do on the weekend was go to the mall or hang out at a fast food joint. My family was middle class, and we lived comfortably, but there was nothing particularly extraordinary about my upbringing. My parents were both employees. My father worked in construction, and my mother was a teacher. They always emphasized the importance of education and stability, so I followed their advice, graduated high school, and went to college with the mindset of getting a degree that would lead to a solid job. I chose business administration as my major. I thought it was practical, something that would give me a wide range of opportunities. During my time in college, I became interested in marketing and consumer behavior, but I still didn't see myself as someone who could actually start something from scratch. I wanted to climb the corporate ladder, not build a ladder of my own. It wasn't until after college that things began to change. I got a job at a mid-sized marketing agency. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I worked long hours doing everything from market research to writing ad copy. My boss was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had worked her way up from a junior position to a leadership role. She had a fire that I admired, but I never imagined I could replicate it. At the time, I was content with my role, even though I always felt like there was something more I could do. One day, I found myself at a networking event. It was the kind of event where you're forced to mingle and pretend to be interested in every person you meet. But then I met someone who was different. His name was Daniel, and he was a tech entrepreneur who had recently sold his startup for a pretty significant amount of money. He spoke with so much enthusiasm about his journey, how he started his business in his garage with just an idea, and how he grew it into a multi-million-dollar company. It wasn't the success itself that intrigued me, but his passion and confidence. We talked for a while, and I shared with him that I had been working in marketing but was feeling stuck in my career. He asked me what I really wanted to do. I told him that I wasn't sure, but I had this idea in the back of my mind for a business. It was nothing elaborate, just a simple service that could help small businesses build their online presence. The more we talked, the more I realized how little I actually knew about entrepreneurship, and yet, Daniel didn't make me feel foolish for dreaming big. He told me that if I really wanted to start something, I needed to stop overthinking and just go for it. His advice was simple: start small, learn as you go, and stay persistent. That conversation stuck with me. For weeks, I thought about it nonstop. I began to research everything I could about starting a business, what steps were necessary, how to build a website, how to market my services, and what kind of legal paperwork I'd need. I didn't have a concrete plan, but I had a vision. I wanted to help small business owners navigate the complexities of digital marketing. The more I researched, the more I realized how many small businesses were being overlooked by traditional marketing agencies because they couldn't afford their hefty fees. I knew there was an opportunity. But here's the thing: starting my business wasn't as easy as I imagined. I had a lot of self-doubt. Every time I thought about quitting my stable job, I became anxious. What if I failed? What if I couldn't make enough money? What if my idea was terrible? The fear of the unknown was paralyzing. So, I did what many aspiring entrepreneurs do. I hesitated. I continued to work my 9-to-5 job while slowly building my business on the side. I spent nights researching, reaching out to potential clients, and putting together a website. I wasn't making any money at first, but I was learning. A few months into this side hustle, I managed to get my first client, a small coffee shop that needed help with social media marketing. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That was the moment I realized I could actually do this. I kept at it, finding more clients and slowly building a reputation. The hours were long, and I was constantly exhausted, but I was learning something new every day. I was doing the work that truly excited me. Eventually, I made the decision to take the leap and quit my job. It was terrifying, but I had already reached a point where I felt confident that I could make this work. The first year of running my business was filled with growing pains. I didn't have enough clients at first to make a full-time income, and I struggled with finding the right balance between work and personal life. There were months when I thought about giving up and finding another job, but I didn't. I kept hustling, focusing on providing exceptional value to my clients. I started building partnerships, outsourcing tasks that weren't my strength, and fine-tuning my services. By the second year, things began to pick up. I was getting referrals from satisfied clients, and I had expanded my services to include website design, SEO, and email marketing. My reputation had grown, and I was now able to command higher rates for my work. My team expanded, and I was no longer doing everything myself. It was a slow and steady climb, but I could finally see the fruits of my labor. Looking back, I've learned that success isn't about having a perfect plan from the start. It's about persistence, learning from failures, and being willing to adapt. There were so many times I wanted to quit, when clients didn't pay on time, when projects didn't go as planned, when I didn't know what the next step was. But I learned to embrace the uncertainty, and with each challenge, I got stronger and more capable. Today, my business is not a huge corporation, but it's sustainable and continues to grow year after year. I've built a team of talented individuals, and we work with some incredible clients. Most importantly, I wake up every day excited about what I do. I can't say it's been an easy journey, but it's been worth it. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone thinking about starting their own business, it's this: don't wait for the perfect moment. The perfect moment doesn't exist. Start where you are, with what you have, and keep pushing forward. It's going to be hard, but if you're willing to learn, adapt, and persevere, you can build something amazing. I'll be honest, this isn't your typical, I started my business with $100 and now I'm a millionaire story. There are no shortcuts or miraculous overnight successes here, just pure grit and a lot of learning from failure. But if you're looking for something real, something relatable, then this might be for you. My name's Ethan, and in 2017, I was working a 9-to-5 job as a project manager at a tech company in San Francisco. I had a decent salary, a small but cozy apartment, and a lot of hopes and dreams, none of which were anywhere close to the path I'm on now. I was living a good life, but it wasn't the life I wanted. I was constantly scrolling through social media, watching other entrepreneurs flexing their success stories, and feeling like I was stuck in a cycle. I was comfortable, and that was the problem. One day, after another routine weekend of scrolling through Instagram and feeling that pang of, I should be doing more, I decided I was going to build something. But what? I didn't know yet. All I had was an itch to create and a growing sense of dissatisfaction. I didn't want to leave my job right away, so I thought I'd start small. I had a passion for health and fitness, so I began looking into ways to blend that with a business. I knew I could start a blog or an online coaching business, but that didn't feel exciting. I wanted something bigger, something that could scale. I had an idea one afternoon when I was at the gym. I was talking to a friend, and we were discussing how hard it was to find good, reliable workout equipment that didn't cost an arm and a leg. That's when it hit me. There was a gap in the market for affordable, high-quality fitness gear. I didn't have the money to create an entire fitness brand from scratch, but I could start with one product. I knew it could be the foundation for something bigger. So, I did what anyone would do when they have a seed of an idea. I Googled. I spent days researching suppliers, reading articles about fitness trends, and diving into the world of e-commerce. Eventually, I found a manufacturer in China that could produce resistance bands for a fraction of what the big names were charging. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was a product I knew could make a difference, especially in the growing at-home fitness market. I spent $2,000 of my savings to order my first batch of 1,000 resistance bands. I had no idea what I was doing. None. I had to learn how to build a website, create a brand identity, and market the product all on my own. I remember spending late nights trying to design a logo that looked halfway decent and figuring out Shopify on the fly. When the shipment arrived, I thought I'd be jumping for joy. Instead, I was terrified. There they were, 1,000 bands in my living room. I didn't know where to start. I couldn't afford to hire anyone, so I had to wear all the hats. Marketing, customer service, logistics, I was doing it all. The first few weeks were rough. I had no traffic, no sales, and to be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. I tried running ads on Facebook and Instagram, but the return on investment was dismal. I spent hours watching YouTube videos, reading blog posts, and joining e-commerce forums. Slowly, I learned how to optimize my ads, craft better product descriptions, and engage with my audience. But it still wasn't working. I wasn't gaining traction. Then, after a particularly discouraging week, I came up with a new idea: influencer marketing. I was already following a bunch of fitness influencers who seemed to have an audience that might be interested in my product. But how do you approach someone with 100K followers when you have no credibility? The answer: you offer something of value, even if it's not money. I started reaching out to influencers, offering to send them a free set of bands in exchange for a review or a shout-out on their page. Most didn't reply. Some politely declined. But a few took a chance on me. And that's when things started to change. One influencer with around 50K followers posted a picture with my resistance bands, and within hours, my website saw its first big spike in traffic. Sales started trickling in. I wasn't rich yet, but I was starting to see some progress. More influencers jumped on board, and slowly but surely, my brand began to grow. But just as things were starting to get better, I hit a major obstacle. In 2019, my supplier contacted me and told me they could no longer provide the same product at the price I was paying. The cost of manufacturing had increased due to tariffs, and if I wanted to keep selling the bands, I would have to raise my prices. This was a nightmare. I had built my brand around being affordable, and now I was going to have to charge more. I didn't know what to do. I feared this would be the end of my business. But instead of giving up, I pivoted. I began researching new suppliers, looking for ways to keep my costs low without sacrificing quality. After months of trial and error, I found a new manufacturer that was able to provide better quality bands at a competitive price. But the learning didn't stop there. I started focusing more on building my email list, creating content that engaged my audience, and working on retention strategies to keep my customers coming back. By the end of 2020, I had expanded my product line to include dumbbells, kettlebells, and yoga mats. I hired my first employee to handle customer service, and I outsourced logistics to a fulfillment center. My business was no longer a side hustle, it was a full-fledged company. But success didn't come without its challenges. The fitness market is highly competitive, and there were times when I felt like I was drowning. In 2021, I faced a serious cash flow issue when I overestimated demand and ordered too much inventory. I had a warehouse full of products, but sales were slower than expected. I had to take out a business loan to cover the gap, and I spent months hustling to get things back on track. It took almost 5 years from the day I first started to the point where I could confidently say my business was thriving. I won't sugarcoat it. It was a roller coaster. There were moments when I thought about quitting, when I was so stressed that I couldn't sleep, when I felt like I had failed. But now, looking back, I realized that the hard times were where I learned the most. I learned how to navigate obstacles, how to pivot when things weren't working, and how to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. Now, I have a team of 12 employees, a brand that's recognized in the fitness space, and a sense of pride in the business I've built. It's not perfect, and there's still a lot of work to do, but I'm finally doing what I love. So, if you're sitting on the sidelines, unsure whether you should take the leap into entrepreneurship, let me tell you this: it's not going to be easy. It's going to be messy, exhausting, and filled with moments of doubt. But if you're willing to put in the work, learn from your mistakes, and push through the tough times, you can build something meaningful. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen if you keep going. And that's the real story behind my success. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.